Hey everyone, Dr. Chris here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking once again about GIS and geoscience. Today's video starts at the very beginning of the process. May not be the most exciting thing in the world, but it is essential. Today's video is on file naming and folder structure. Here we go. All right, here I am back in my home office, and this is my first video in my series on GIS and geoscience. Now, admittedly, this won't be the most exciting of all the videos that I create, but it is key to making sure that you get your GIS and geoscience projects right at the beginning. And that's because I'm going to be talking about organization of your data on your hard drive and naming of your data on your hard drive. Before we get going, a quick reminder to sign up for my newsletter at geographicinformationsuccess.com. Also, check out my book, Permissionless GIS, Double Your GIS Job Interviews Now, and make sure you check out my Teespring store for GIS and geoscience related merch. Back to the video. Again, what I'm going to be talking about right now is not the most exciting thing in GIS and geoscience, but is absolutely imperative to get correct, and that is naming. Both naming of your folders and naming of your files. This is imperative, especially when you're dealing with GIS data and especially when you're dealing with a lot of projects. You want to make sure that your folders make sense. You want to make sure that your geodatabase makes sense. And you want to make sure that they all work together properly. Now, why on earth would you want to make sure that your naming is right off the bat? And why would you want to make sure that your folder systems and your geodatabase systems work together right off the bat? Well, first and foremost, as a geoscientist, when you're doing geoscientific surveys, you don't just do one geoscientific survey. You do multiple geoscientific surveys, multiple back-to-back, multiple concurrently sometimes, and you're going to end up with a lot of projects on your hard drive. What this means is that if you're not organized within your file system or your folder system, you're going to get lost if someone says, hey, what about that project you worked on last week or last month, or the one that you're working on right now side by side with another that you're working on right now. If you don't have a solid folder structure, a solid naming system, when you get asked these questions, you'll get a little bit confused. I'm also going to give you the thought that your data technically has two locations. That location is inside your GIS and outside your GIS. And there's going to be a different naming scheme for whether your data is internal, whether your data is external. First, we're going to look at your GIS data and folder system that is internal. Your internal naming system, your internal folder system, your internal geodatabases, they have to have maximum compatibility within your system. Well, that means that your geodatabase and your folder system are fairly interchangeable. This is important because a lot of the times you're going to have a sort of hybrid system of GIS. You may use a bit of paid GIS software. You may use a bit of open source. Also, within the geoscience sphere, there's a lot of other little programs that handle GIS data a little bit differently. So you're going to have to sort of mix and match between your geodatabase and your folder system. But they still have to make sense, they still have to be named properly, and they still have to work across multiple projects. We start off by doing something that may sound a little obvious, but we name things exactly what they are in the GIS context. Roads are roads, fences are fences, wells are wells, pipelines are pipelines. All of these things within our GIS system, within our folder system, have very specific names for exactly what they are. What this means is that in one of your projects, roads are roads. In another project, roads are roads. In another project, roads are roads. Now, why do we do this? We ensure that the naming of the features within our folder system, within our geodatabases, are all the same so that we know where our data is, so that we as GIS geoscientists are able to say exactly where the road systems are, exactly where the wells are for our areas. I've seen a lot of GIS people name their features roads version 2, pipelines extension V3, or power lines digitized Wednesday. This naming system is okay when you're dealing with derived data, when you are processing your data. But when you're creating active versions for your mapping, active versions for your projects, they should only have one single name, again, that being roads. not roads version 2, roads. This same naming scheme is also relevant for your folder system. Here is an example of the folder system and naming that I use for all my GIS projects. Incoming folder, this is for all the data that is coming in. It has not been conditioned yet. Could be from a client. This is where I check it before bringing it into my geo database. It's a good place to store unaltered data. It's a good place to also bring in massive data sets that you haven't quite looked at or you haven't clipped down to fit right into each of your projects. Next is an outgoing folder. That's where I put all the data that's coming out of my geodatabase, which I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes here. I also have a folder and a geodatabase set up for my rasters. That is because a lot of the time some programs can't actually look into a geodatabase to look at a raster in your geodatabase. So you've got to export it out. And this is where I like keeping the exported raster that is going to be used by another program very close to the rasters that I use within my geodatabase. You'll also notice that I have a project name folder right next to my project name geodatabase. That is because in many cases, what I will do is I will have duplicates of what's in my geodatabase, also in this folder, but in different formats, say in KML, KMZs, or in shapefile. This way, I can keep copies of what's in my geodatabase outside the geodatabase for other programs to access, because many times you use a blended GIS system or some of the geoscience software can't actually look into a geodatabase. Here's a big caveat. You don't have to copy exactly what I have done for your folder system. I use this because I understand this and it works well for me. But I am going to say that you are going to have to develop a file folder, file naming system that works for you, especially when you're dealing with GIS and geoscience. And that is because we end up working with a lot of projects, both at the same time and concurrently. So we have to make sure that our folders make sense. With respect to featured assets within a geodatabase, once again, I have very specific naming for each of my featured datasets. In this case, I'm just giving you an example. Boundaries, ecology, geoscience, hydro, infrastructure, pre-survey, post-survey, and coordinate system. Now, you may want to add a bunch more, but this is the basic ones that I use, again, for every single GIS geoscience project that I create. Remember when I said that I had a folder that was a duplicate of my geodatabase? Well, within that folder, each subfolder is also named these names here, which match the featured datasets within my geodatabase. But it is something to keep in mind when you want massive organization within each of your projects. Now, why do you want to have massive organization within each one of your projects? Well, that is because you will want to automate your systems using Python, which maximizes also your creativity when you're dealing with GIS and geoscience. Automation with Python is essential, especially when you're dealing with multiple projects. And that's because you're not going to want to do a bazillion clicks to do the same thing over and over again in each project. Automating all these selects and clips opens up creativity because now you can focus on the analysis, you can focus on the survey, you can focus on doing some really cool stuff with the imagery. Being organized and having very specific feature names, very specific folder names across all your projects simply allows you to automate more and opens you up to a lot more creativity in your GIS and geoscience projects. All of this is internal to your GIS. This is data that you own, that you understand, that you control, and that's why you keep it organized, and that's why you name it in a specific way. Now, remember what I said about data. There's data inside your GIS, and there's data outside your GIS, which requires very special naming as well. I've already covered this in a few other videos, but I like covering this again because naming data that's outside your GIS drives me nuts, and it drives me nuts because of this. As a GIS person, we've all received something that looks like this. Never, 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 never name a file outside your GIS this. Obviously, it doesn't have to say roads. It can be fences. It can be pipes. It can be buildings. Never name this. Why? Because that tells you nothing about the data that you're sending out. That is why I'm going to suggest a naming scheme that looks essentially like this. I've talked about this before in many videos, and that is what you've got here, where at the beginning you've got a project code. shortened because sometimes they get a little bit long if you've got a really long project name. The next thing is what it is. In this case, roads. Be very specific what it is. Now, the naming can sort of change if, say, for instance, you're sending out roads that are clipped due to flooding potential. You could put that in there, but make sure it's named very specifically so people know what it is. You also have to include a date that is exported. That's what I do. That's how I do version control. I know when the data is going out or when it went out based on my date here. That is year, month, day. And finally, you're going to want to include the datum and the projection. But right here, this is what your data should look like when it leaves your geodatabase. Even if you're storing it, it should look like this. To recap, in this video, I talked about how you should set up each one of your GIS Geoscience projects to look exactly the same, both in your naming of your features and your folder systems and the structure of your folder and geodatabase systems. You get this level of organizations because chances are you're going to be doing a lot of projects at the same time and many projects back to back. You want to be able to know exactly where your data is, and you do that by knowing that when you name a feature, roads, it's roads in every single one of your projects. You want to know where your rasters are. They're in the raster folder or raster geodatabase of every single project. Your naming and your folder structure can evolve over time, but I've given you a nice base for you to understand how to build your own system. Thanks for watching. Before I go, just a reminder to sign up for my newsletter at geographicinformationsuccess.com. Check out my book, Permissionless GIS, Double Your GIS Job Interviews Now. Also, check out my Teespring store for GIS and Geoscience merch. All proceeds go to support this channel. Thanks. If you like this video, please give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, add me to your LinkedIn, or even better, share my videos through your networks. Till next time, I'm Dr. Chris. Keep rocking.